Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habib. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who aren't sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, Hashem, Brahman, Great Spirit, higher power, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true selves, to our source, to the light that each of us carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introduction of our conversation partner for this episode, Dr. Jihad Turk. Jihad Turk is the founding president of Bayan Islamic Graduate School, a preeminent Muslim institution of higher education. Dr. Turk served as the Imam for many years at the Islamic Center of Southern California. He has received awards for his religious leadership by the U.S. Congress, the Valley Interfaith Council, the South Coast Interfaith Council. He's been acknowledged as a local hero by the World Festival of Sacred Music and was recognized as one of the 500 most influential people in Los Angeles by the LA Business Journal. To learn more about Dr. Turk and his work, please visit bayanonline.org. Jihad, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my honor and pleasure, Dr. Habib.
So, if you would you introduce yourself to our listeners by way of sharing your spiritual story?
Sure. I feel free to jump in. I don't want to drone on for too long, but I'll just start at the beginning, if I may. But
Please.
my father is an immigrant from Jerusalem. He was born in the Old City, right next to the Dome of the Rock.
Oh, wow.
Even though my ancestry is from Hebron, which is about an hour south of Jerusalem, it's where Abraham is buried. So the patriarch of monotheism. But my father immigrated to the U.S. by himself at the age of 17. He was sponsored by a local business person in California and finished high school there, apprenticed at that businessman's print shop. He became a printer. And then met my mom and got married and moved to Arizona, where I was born and raised. My mom is originally from Oklahoma.
Wow.
And so I say my dad's from the Mideast and my mom's from the Midwest. But so I'm an American kid from Arizona with
Yeah.
that sort of more unusual background. My mother comes from a Methodist
Mm,
background.
mhm.
Wasn't super practicing, but a believer in God. And
Yeah.
my father was a practicing Muslim, but I wouldn't say a knowledgeable Muslim. I don't think
Mm.
he's read a book in his life other than the
Wow.
Quran. And yeah, I mean, he must have because he got his associate's degree in college. Didn't finish a bachelor's degree, but so he must
Yeah.
have read something. But I had never seen it
Yeah.
in my young life and my adult life. He passed a year ago, almost exactly,
Mm, mm.
at the age of 87.
Yeah.
But he had a practice of Islam. But really, he didn't have much to pass on to me by way of knowledge of the faith,
Mhm.
either book knowledge or a profound spiritual knowledge, because he hadn't followed a Sufi sheikh, or
Mhm.
he just had superficial knowledge of the faith, but it was enough for him, and it was a foundation and a bedrock for him.
Yeah.
So to his credit, he he did a couple of things foundationally for me in my spiritual journey.
Mhm.
The first thing he did is he worked like three jobs when I was growing up. He was a
Mhm.
door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman. He was a printer, and then he eventually got into real estate. So he was doing all three at one time when I was younger. But he
Yeah.
always took Sundays off,
Mm.
and Sunday being the sacred day for Muslims. No, I'm just kidding. Sunday was his day off, and so he created a Sunday school with maybe three or four other families, and they ended up purchasing a house eventually. But at first, we met in random places, community centers, the basement of a bank. It's weird that they opened up a bank, the basement of a bank for for the community to rent
Huh.
and conduct Sunday school in Arizona. In various locations. And then ultimately we bought a house and we would meet there and have a Sunday school class. We would learn Arabic over and over and over for the first 15 years of my life, taught by one of the uncles in the community. We
Right.
eventually had like a youth group.
Mm.
We learned the basics of Islam. So that
Yeah.
was one thing he did, and he also practiced in the home, prayed regularly, etc.
Yeah.
But the second thing that he did that was, I think, quite influential in my spiritual journey is that he helped found and attended every year since 1962 a Muslim retreat, a Muslim youth camp, family camp.
Mm. Mm.
And I was born in 71. And so I've been going to this family camp pretty much every year since then. And I'll be 55 coming up this July. So I probably missed maybe 10 years over the 55 years, but he's
Mm.
been going since the early 60s. And even though we lived in Arizona, we would drive out as a family and spend a week at this camp. And scholars would come to the camp, people who
Mm.
were learned,
Mm.
who had a profound connection to the faith. And
Yeah.
we lived as a Muslim community, as if we were in a Muslim majority country for a week
Yeah.
uh, every summer. It was pretty awesome.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, made friends because,
Mm.
in Phoenix in the 70s, there weren't, you were either black, white, or Mexican. There weren't a lot of, Muslims there. Like I said, there were only 3 or 4 families
Yeah.
that we met up with on Sundays, and none of their kids went to our elementary school or high school. So it was just our family.
Yeah.
Um, I had uh, one brother who's the oldest and 3 sisters. But I would say my spiritual journey began in earnest
Mm.
when, in the middle of my high school career, in which I was doing quite well, I have to say. And he also sent us to Minna in the winter. He started in the mid 80s. He started sending us to the Muslim Youth of North America, which is like another youth camp, but just for young people. There wasn't a family camp. It was just a youth camp in the frozen tundra of Plainfield, Indiana, in the winter. I remember one year it was 20 degrees below zero and mud froze, and
Wow.
I was like, "What? Mud could freeze?" In Arizona, it dropped it down into the 40s in the winter. It was
Right.
rarely very cold there. So that
Right.
was an experience. But I also met some pretty profound individuals at that occasion. But in the
Mm.
middle of all of that,
Yeah.
after 24 years of marriage, my parents divorced, and it was sudden,
Mm.
and it was kind of jolting, shocking to my system. And I had a moment where I just reflected and, asked, well, what is permanent? What is the
Mm.
ultimate source of inner peace? Where does that, where do I find that? Because I thought it was like everything was stable around me. And then all of a sudden my world was shocked. And, and at the same time, in an outwardly way, I was on top of the world. I was both academically, near the top of my class, and in sports, I was, lettered as a varsity, my sophomore year in track, and
Mm.
in, football, I got moved up to varsity my sophomore year, and and I was popular. I was homecoming king, my senior year, and but none of that meant anything. It was all empty,
Yeah.
shallow, hollow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was asking myself, well, what is that source? If it's not what everyone is looking for, because I had it at that time,
Yeah.
um, in this outwardly superficial, worldly, material sense. And if, necessarily, love marriage isn't necessarily the end all and be all of inner peace and happiness, then what is it? And instead of turning to drugs and alcohol like many of my classmates did
Mm.
in Phoenix, Arizona, growing up.
Yeah.
I had uh, a sense that some of the people I met at those camps, that there was some there. Like some of them seemed to really have the sense of inner peace and tranquility that I was
Mhm.
looking for. So I
Yeah.
said, let me look into this religion thing. And my mom being Christian, my dad being Muslim, I gave me license to look into both of those two.
Yeah.
I'm Palestinian-American, so I didn't look into Judaism because of, the tension around that topic
Right.
as it relates to Zionism and the occupation of Palestine. So I didn't take a deep look at Judaism, but I did look at Christianity and at Islam. And as I did so, I, tried finding books to read. This is before the age of the internet. So there
Right.
was no, Googling anything. This was in the 80s,
Yeah.
88, 87, 88, 89. And I, uh, I just started reading random books, and I didn't have anybody to guide me as to even which books to read. And a knowledgeable person happened to come into town, and we didn't have very many of those in Phoenix at the time. But
Right.
he was traditionally trained, in the Middle East. He studied at Al Azhar. He studied at, in Kuwait with, high level scholars,
Hmm.
shuyukh, as we would say in the Arabic, kind of, uh, um, some of them were profoundly spiritual Sufi masters. Others were scholars in law and other disciplines.
Hmm.
But he had studied there traditionally, and then come and studied at the highest level in the West. He had studied at Yale and at Penn Law School, and was clerking for the Supreme Court of Arizona at the time I
Hmm.
met him, and that's why he was in Arizona for a year. And then went on to do his doctorate at Princeton in Islamic studies and became a professor ultimately. So he had married the someone local to Arizona, who one of the families that my father had teamed up with to create the local mosque.
Hmm.
And so that's how I was introduced to him. And I, I said, when he visited, I said, can you just give me a reading list? Give me a list of books. I'm so eager to learn. And he kind of just blew me off and didn't think I was very serious. But I kept persisting and pestering him. And, I
Yeah.
said, look, I'm not asking for anything. Just give me a list of books. Like, where do I start?
Yeah.
And so after a while, he kind of figured, okay, maybe I was serious. And so he said, well, look, why don't you just come over, bring some friends if you want, and we'll start a little study circle. And
Hmm.
I was like, wide-eyed and enthusiastic. So I came with a couple of my sisters, and there was another family that had recently moved into town. So my friend and his sisters. So it was just like 5 or 6 of us,
Yeah.
and we started this twice a week intensive 3-4 hours at a time study
Wow.
circle where we studied exactly what I was looking for. We studied
Hmm.
foundational texts of Revelation and
Yeah.
the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We studied texts of theology and law and philosophy and commentary on the Quran, and it was awesome. So for a year, I did this, and then he finished his term at the Supreme Court of Arizona as a clerk, and then he went on to Princeton.
Yeah.
And during that time, I said, I want to learn more because I didn't grow up speaking Arabic. I mean,
Hmm.
with they say mother tongue for a reason. My mother, being from Oklahoma, did not know any Arabic, and so
Right.
I, during that time, decided after my freshman year, and this was during my freshman year of college, 1989-90, at
Hmm.
Arizona State University. I was studying engineering. Um, I decided to apply for a scholarship to go study Arabic at the Islamic University in Medina, Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And right at the beginning of my sophomore year, and 1 week after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the run up to the first Gulf War,
Wow.
I was accepted. to that program, which is a full ride scholarship. They fly you out, they put you up, they give you a stipend even,
Wow.
and it's an immersion. It's an immersion program in Arabic for, it could be for 10 years if you want. Arabic program, bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctorate degree. So, I was kind of set. I was really excited, and so I withdrew from college. I went and I did a couple of years there, and remember, this is in the run up to the first Gulf War. So I'm there on this spiritual mission. My American cousins, my cousin Chad was there on a different mission. He was sent by the U.S. military on a war mission, and there I was on a mission to try and understand the universe and the my own self and figure
Mm.
out my place in existence. And so I had my walkabout, my spiritual walkabout there. And I remember one day, the bombs had been falling on Baghdad and all over Iraq starting in January 15th of 1991. Um, and I had gone there 6 months before that during the buildup in August of 1990.
Mm.
But they closed the university during the bombing, and I just remember going in the middle of the night out to, they had a sports field there in the desert of Arabia. It was artificial turf, of course. And I just laid down there in the middle of the pitch, looking up at the brilliant, incredibly brilliant night sky. There was no moon at that day, on that day. And just asking God, what is my point? Before I reached that point, I had learned enough Arabic where when I would stand in prayer and listen to a reciter recite the revelation in the original Arabic language, I was able to pick up 50, 60, 70, 80% even
Mm.
of what was being said. It was very profound. And I was like, I found it. This is it. And then my question was, what do I want to do with my life? And that's
Mm.
when I sort of decided I know what I want to do. I want to come back and become a professor of Islamic studies and offer courses that I wish were available at my university when I was studying engineering, just as an elective to learn about Islam and Muslims in a way that wasn't hostile, because oftentimes, those
Yes.
subjects are taught by people who are Orientalists, who are either antithetical to religion in general or Islam in particular. And so I said, I want to offer those classes in a way that is accessible, that is authentic, that
Yeah.
is academic, but really showcases the beauty of what that faith has to offer. And so I decided I needed to go to a better university than Arizona State University. And so I applied to and ultimately got accepted to study at the University of California, Berkeley, where I did a bachelor's degree in Islamic history and Arabic.
Mm.
And before finishing my degree after my junior year, I withdrew another year and said I learned so much more by the immersion experience of Arabic in Arabia. Let me
Yeah.
do the same for Persian, for Farsi.
Mm.
So I talked to one of my professors there, who was a British convert to Islam, Dr. Hamid Algar, who wrote me some letters of introduction. And I just went and explored Iran, landed there with no program or anything, and ended up finding something beautiful and studied in both Qom, which is the headquarters of Shia Islam, but also the University of Tehran, learning Farsi and doing some Islamic studies there as well.
Wow.
And then came back and finished up my degree, got married my senior year of college, moved to Texas for my master's degree at the University of Texas at Austin in Islamic law and jurisprudence, and then came out to UCLA in 1999 to pursue my doctoral degree in Islamic studies, where I taught for a number of years. And I'll just conclude my spiritual journey by saying this, because my spiritual journey then ultimately led to my professional journey, which, I was I'd been teaching Arabic and Islamic studies as an adjunct faculty at UCLA while doing my doctoral degree. But I was approached by the leadership of the oldest and largest mosque in Southern California, and they said, "Oh, can you serve as our religious director, our imam, our clergy person?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of on a trajectory to becoming a professor. That's not really what I had in mind." And they said, "Well, you can keep doing that, but you can also serve as our religious director because, you literally and figuratively speak the languages of our community. You can also hopefully connect to young people, and you can help our communities be more civically engaged, given that you were born and raised in this country." There were probably 80 different nationalities at the mosque, and probably 90% of them were born and raised outside of this country.
Mm.
So I said, "I'll give it a try," but I was quite skeptical. And to my surprise, I found the community very dynamic, the leadership very visionary and supportive. And I really enjoyed my time there. I started in 2005 and was their director until 2012. But one of the things that they let me do was to create a third space, to create a space for people who might have been born Muslim but didn't find the mosque particularly fulfilling
Mm.
or a meaningful place for their spirituality. And so we created a young professionals group, and we had a large group of at one point 1,500 members, and we would meet. We would do hiking and biking and book clubs and feeding the poor, and just all kinds of. We would have a monthly potluck dinner and just the Quranic reflections, and it was
Mm.
awesome.
Mm.
And the other thing in addition to creating a food pantry and at the Islamic Center, which is one of the first things that first projects I undertook, they also were supportive of the project that it really fell in my lap when I was approached by the president of a 130-year-old Christian seminary, Claremont School of Theology, which uh, Dr. Jerry Campbell came to me and said, "I need your help. We're a 130-year-old Christian seminary, and I've been following your leadership, and can you help us out?" And I was like, "Well, what can I do? I'm Muslim clergy person here in LA," and he said, "Well, Christian mainline Protestant seminary education has been on the decline in the U.S. since the 70s, and they brought me on as the new president to revitalize this institution." Jerry was from Texas, Dr. Campbell, and so he said, "I've been working on something, and here's where I could use your help. I want to make religion relevant again and meaningful and fulfilling for young people who oftentimes look at religion as a source of conflict and division and war." He said, "I want to reclaim the role of religion to be a force for peacemaking in the world, and I want to desegregate theological education." And I said, "Wow, that sounds awesome. What does it mean?" And he said, "Well, I want to partner with a Muslim seminary, graduate level seminary, and a Jewish seminary and a Buddhist university, and to create a consortium of seminaries so that the next generation of religious leaders profoundly understand one another and can find a common ground upon which they can build a more beautiful tomorrow." I said, "Okay, that is a vision I can get behind, but what can I do? I'm a clergy person." But he said, "Well, can you help identify for me a local accredited Islamic graduate school seminary for us to partner with?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's easy. There doesn't exist one in the entire country, let alone here in Southern California, but we need
Right.
one." And I
Yeah.
happen to be an academic by training. I mean, I was on the long track to my doctoral degree, but I happen to be an academic in training and a clergy person by training and practice. And a
Yeah.
seminary is kind of a combination of those two fields. And so I'm sure the Islamic Center would be supportive of me trying to rally the broader Muslim community of Southern California and beyond in creating one for you to partner with. So he said, "Great. If you do that, we can support you in three ways." And I said, okay, what are those ways? He said, well, first we have a campus. It's 16.4 acres. We have excess capacity in terms of offices and classrooms, and we can share our library and our back office and administration, our student learning system, uh, and and you know we'll give you a leg up that way. I said, okay, great. He said, number two, we can incubate you so that your programs are accredited from the beginning. We
Mhm.
can't give you accreditation, but we can consider you an independent division of our institution and make sure that all of your programs are in line with the requirements for accreditation of the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, which gives us our accreditation. And once you're
Yeah.
ready, you can spin off and take your accreditation with you and be an equal partner around the table. So we're just also giving you a leg up in that regard. I said, great. He said, there's more. I said, Jerry, what more could there be? He said, well, we have one well to do trustee who's so excited about this project that he's willing to cover the tab for the first couple of years to fund it. And I said, Jerry, that's very Christian of you. Let's get started. So, I'm kind of summarizing a 2 year conversation into, 5 minutes, but, we started the conversation in 2009. We announced our partnership in 2010, and we got all the boards aligned, and we created Bayan as an Islamic graduate school during that time. And then we launched our first degree program, master's degree in Islamic Studies and Leadership in the fall of 2011. And
Yeah.
yeah, we had 3 students at the time. And since then, we've had over 250 students matriculate into the program, half of whom have graduated and half of whom are still enrolled. So here's where that's my story. And in that time, my wife and I have had 4 children, and I still go to that youth camp, and
Mm.
where my wife is a Kashmiri American, born in Kashmir but raised in Ohio, and then yeah, our oldest is 25 and our youngest is 15. So yeah, so life is busy and good, and we just launched a new mosque in Santa Monica that I'm very active at, and our family goes to,
Mm.
and I'm still on the journey,
Yeah.
um, and I've met some pretty profound individuals along the way, both scholars, but also once I was in Jerusalem early on in this spiritual journey, and I was visiting family, my uncles and aunts who live in Palestine, and was visiting an uncle who lives at the Dome of the Rock. Like the apartment closest to the Dome of the Rock is where my uncle and his kids live.
Yeah.
Um, and as we were walking around, there was a group of individuals surrounding a wise-looking older gentleman, and he was introduced to me. My uncle introduced him to me, and he came and put his hand on my head and recited a blessing upon me, and it was a very profound spiritual moment for me as well.
Mm.
And yeah, so there's been a number of individuals like that I've met through the years, but ultimately I just remember those early days before I even chose Islam properly. I just
Mm.
remember in prayer turning to God and asking God directly, teach me, guide me.
Yeah.
And God responded by,
Mm.
by bringing people into my life that were guideposts, that were shepherds, that were models for me to follow. And I'm still on that journey,
Mm.
but yeah, it's a beautiful one.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. And so, yeah, so we met in 2014, I think. Um, it was. And what you don't know is I guess in 2013, 20, somewhere around there. The two doctors that I was working with at that time told me I was dying, and I was um, living at a spiritual retreat center and making peace with letting go, and I was having dreams every night about dying, and I thought, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to be face to face with our Lord, and that prompted me to do a series of things. The first was to go study with a teacher in Morocco, and then to do a 40-day retreat. And then during that 40-day retreat, this teacher invited me to go to Jerusalem during Ramadan and be there as part of a trip to study during Ramadan and be at Al-Aqsa during Ramadan. Um, so what else came out of that was going on Hajj. And after I came back from Hajj, I was like, Allah, I'm still here. You know, I'm still alive. What what do you want from me? What's next? And so I prayed uh Istikhara, and in the dream, I prayed Istikhara, went to sleep, had a dream, and it couldn't have been more clear. In the dream, I was telling somebody that I'd gone back to school, I was getting my doctorate. Even the topic of the in the dream, I told someone what the topic of my dissertation was, right? So then I find Bayan. You meet me there, take me to dinner, take me around campus. While we're talking, you tell me about this moment at Al-Aqsa, and we figure out that we're talking about the same guy that I came to Islam through.
Wow. Wow. Yes, I remember that.
And while we were sitting there talking on campus, I there was that little room across from the cafe area, and there were all these brochures, both for Bayan and for Claremont School of Theology. And while you and I were talking, I looked down and I saw in a faculty member's description the field that was the topic of my dissertation in my dream.
Wow.
I was
Wow.
like, okay, I guess this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
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 Sometimes the signs are a little bit, I guess I'm one of those that takes really obvious signs. Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Well, the choice is an illusion in many ways. I mean, we're kind of floating down the cosmic river. Having lived in Texas, we would sometimes go tubing. So I feel like we're tubing down the cosmic river, and we
Yeah.
think we can really choose where we're going, but that river's already carved out.
Yeah.
We either accept it and go with the flow or fight it, but ultimately that river's going where it's going. And
Yeah. Indeed.
yes,
Indeed. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but I lived in many years. I grew up in Magnolia, Texas. I I was born in also the Midwest. I was born in Kansas, so not far from Oklahoma, just neighbors. Grew up in Texas, spent many years. My first master's degree was at Texas State, so I went tubing, very likely down the same river that you went
the
to,
Ria Fria, we went and visited the Ria Fria. I think it was outside of Austin. It wasn't in Austin, but yes.
right? Yeah,
Is that where you went? Is the Ria Fria?
I think so. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
100% on the name, but it was a river not far out of Austin, so it kind of
yeah,
where that was the thing, where that was where people went tubing in the area. So
yeah, yeah.
probably the same. Yeah. And then of course the fact that your family is from Hebron. Um, do you still have family there?
Many family members. My dad was one of 12 kids,
Yeah.
and a handful of them live in Jerusalem, and the rest live in of his siblings live in Hebron, and Palestinians have large families. So one uncle in Hebron had 17 kids. One
Wow.
had, yeah, one had in Jerusalem had 12 kids. And each of them have kids, et cetera, and grandkids. So there's it's quite a large family there, and the family, the extended family from which we come, the tribe, if you will, is called the Abu Sneina tribe. There's over 25,000 members of that tribe in Hebron. So there's an
Wow.
entire neighborhood just opposite the mosque in which Abraham and his family are buried, just
Mm,
across the hill facing it, rather,
yeah.
is known as the district of Abu Sneina. And
Mm,
there's a big graveyard there, and that's the graveyard of Abu Sneina. So the family has been there for quite some time.
mm. I one of the most profound experiences spiritually of my life was visiting Hebron. And
Mm.
um, being a white American convert, in retrospect, I realized that when I walked into the mosque there, that probably what I was getting was a little bit of skepticism, perhaps even well-founded suspicion. Like, who is this guy? What is he doing here? Is he for real? Like, what is his intention? At the time, I really had no understanding of what it, I mean, and how can I really have much of an understanding of what it must be to live like in under occupation or but now I have a bit more understanding of the context. But there was definitely those looks that was kind of like it felt minimally standoffish. And then when I went and I just went and stood in front of the tomb of where Abraham is, peace be upon him, and I just offered a Fatiha, and my heart just broke open. And I just like, again, one of those moments you can't describe, that that there's no words to really convey what is happening in those moments. And I turned around and there was this older gentleman there with his prayer beads. He looked like he'd been sitting there for 100 years. He looked like he hadn't moved, and yet he looked at me. And I looked at him, and I don't know that I've ever felt so seen in my entire life. And I walked out of that just bawling.
Yeah. I mean, Abraham is the epitome of human seeking and connection to the divine.
He,
Having come from a background of idol worship and false gods, to then seeing through all of the obfuscation that human beings create between us and God, and to great self-sacrifice, found his journey and connected with the divine, and ultimately he was expelled from his family and his village, and had to make it on his own. But yeah, he's the epitome of one undertaking a spiritual journey, and finding connection.
yeah,
And so it's not surprising that it's at his graveside
yeah.
that you know a seeker like yourself is reaffirmed in the profundity of what you're undertaking.
Yes. And it was a real experience of what I would call tasting the unity, tasting that sense of there not being a self anymore, just not being separation. Um, like I remember when I walked back into the larger area, the larger prayer room area, and it was just like all these guys who had been looking at me somewhat skeptically before, like everyone came up to say, like, how long have you been a Muslim? Or, like if somebody knew any English, they used the however much they knew. I mean, it was just this, it was like there was this outpouring of love that encompassed everyone.
Mm.
It was a really indescribable and beautiful experience that I'll always carry in my heart.
You know, when I was my during that freshman year of college, um, across the street from the university, they had just built. It used to be a house that my father would take us to, but then they ultimately turned it into a proper mosque
Mm.
in Tempe, Arizona, and it actually replicates. It's a replica of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. So I don't know if
Mm.
you've ever seen it, but you can Google it and maybe provide a picture for your listeners here on the podcast. But it's this beautiful space literally across the street from the university. And so I would find refuge in between classes there. And I was there one day for an afternoon prayer my freshman year, just kind of searching. And part of the one of the exercises that the scholar that I was studying with, the sheikh, had us do was to just do some introspection and,
Mm.
ask us some profound questions about what makes us tick, like what's our motivation, why do we do what we do, how do we present ourselves in this world the way that we present ourselves.
Right.
And I just remember after the Asr prayer, just sitting there, and I don't really usually talk about this, but I had this ecstatic experience where I just felt like I ascended and was, I think this is probably from the words of Emerson or Thoreau or someone, but I felt like I was a transparent eyeball,
Mm.
where I was, out of body experience. I was, God saw right through me, but I could also see.
Mm.
And um, I felt seen, like you felt seen that day by
Yeah.
those around you. I felt seen by the divine, um, and a kind of inner peace or tranquility that has only ever been um, approached ever since then. But it was so profound that it is sufficient. It is
Mm.
sufficient.
Mm.
Yeah, that has been that was a pivotal moment in my journey.
Yeah.
And I've had other experiences similar, but nothing quite as profound as that one. And the most profound things you really can't put into words. So I don't usually speak about that event. Um, I don't know what to say about it other than what I've just shared.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you for sharing. You know, those profound experiences are they're what buoy our hearts and our souls through the rest of our lives. Yeah. And I can certainly think.
I would go ahead, finish.
Oh, no, please.
I wanted to maybe just share um, one attitude or posture that I carry with me when dealing with oftentimes young people who identify as spiritual but not religious.
Mm.
And, my response to them is religion, when done right, which is a big caveat, by the way, but
Right.
religion, when done right, is spirituality plus three things that spirituality isn't, it's two other things that spirituality alone doesn't provide you. So it's spiritual, it's three things, but two additional things. So it's spirituality
Mm.
plus some self-discipline, because the religion is structure. And I'm
Right.
not talking about hierarchical structure and an intermediary between you and God, but the five daily prayers, the fasting of the month of Ramadan, the remembrance of God, and all of the little details
Mm.
that, from how you dress to how you eat and what you eat and, what you don't eat,
Right.
that discipline
Mhm.
is, I would say, like analogous to a sailboat. For those who sail, you know that a sailboat has a sail above, but what you don't see is this keel, this kind of fin that goes under the boat. And the deeper the keel, the more that that boat can weather a big storm. Because if you didn't have a keel, a wind would come and would tip you over. You know, the sail would be
Yeah.
pushed over and you would capsize. But
Yeah.
if you have a deep keel, a deep fin underneath that boat, it allows you to weather the toughest of storms. And I feel like the ritual and the discipline of religion, in
Hmm.
some ways, is a deepening of your spiritual keel, so that you
Hmm.
can weather whatever storm. And then the last thing that religion offers you, that spirituality alone, I feel, does not, is a real sense of community.
Hmm.
Because no man is an island unto himself, or no woman an island unto herself. And so to have people surrounding you, none of whom are perfect, by the way, but who are at least on the same journey as you, to try and uh, elevate their character and to be mindful of God and to be centered in their connection to to center their connection to the divine, um, is encouraging to you when sometimes those efforts wane. To have those around you who can help pick you back up and
Yes.
walk along with you, maybe with a helping hand, or to
Hmm.
help you navigate over hurdles or around hurdles. That's something that religion, when done right, um, is beyond just spirituality, but it is also spiritual, because
Yeah.
ultimately, when you have the community and you have that discipline, it just allows the spirituality to grow and develop, in ways that being sort of loosey goosey, spirit, defining yourself as spiritual but without any sort of practice.
Right.
It's kind of interesting, because in Buddhism, it's mostly practice and not so much theology, right?
Hmm.
There's, Buddhism is known as a practice generally, and not a theology, but even though it's described as a world religion, um, practice is important. Practice is important to spirituality. And I feel that religion is that kind of individual, but also collective practice
Yeah.
that makes spirituality, um, more possible and more probable, I would say.
Yeah.
So
I agree 100%. And and I have to add, if you'll indulge me, that that we don't know that where someone is today is not necessarily where someone is tomorrow. And I think the reason I throw that in is just because in my own spiritual journey, there was growing up in such an exclusivist conservative Christian church and feeling so at dissonance with my experience there that I turned away from anything to do with religion. Like, if someone had said that you must be religious at that point in my life, I would have had such resistance and pushback against that. And I feel like it's only God that knows where we are today could be a completely different place from where we are tomorrow, which could be a different place from where we are the day after that. And and so I feel it like because I personally have experienced the divine hand moving me in ways that I never would have imagined. How can I have any judgment about where someone else is in their journey, whether they are in finding themselves located in a religion on that day or not? Because ultimately, I feel like I don't know. Like I don't have any room to judge that because it could be completely different so
yeah,
I,
I hear what you're saying, and I was what I was attempting to communicate was not judgment, because I
yeah.
agree with you fully.
Okay. Yeah.
We only see part of the picture,
Right.
and only God knows our capacity and where we are in our journey. My sort of stand or posture on that topic is really just to crack the door open for
Yeah.
someone who has had a bad experience with a practice of religion to say, look, religion, when done right, can actually be a value add.
Right.
Perhaps I'm not saying you have to, or I'm judging you for not being, but perhaps you might find a religious community and practice that will be fulfilling for you and provide you that sense of meaning and purpose that you're seeking.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's just to crack the door open, not to
And
stand in
that's
judgment or to look down. And that's an important distinction. I thank you for raising that. Um,
oh,
that
and thank
response that some people might have it viscerally to to the idea of religion having a negative or a bitter taste in their mouth or
right, right.
whatever
I mean,
practice.
I went that through that phase where if you just said the word God, I'd have been like, any word, religion, just the word religion, any of that. And so I really appreciate you bringing up the idea of opening the door or cracking the door, I think you said, because that's how I experienced Sheikh Muhammad al-Jamal, who I came to Islam through. I experienced him as opening a door. He cracked open the door and he didn't say you have to be a Muslim. He said essentially, and this is my obviously my paraphrasing it, but he was, if you know a religion, you know that all religion is basically love. There's basically one religion. It's the religion of love and peace and mercy. And and so that opened my heart. That cracked the door, and I could through that. And then gradually I got moved to a place of, oh, yes, I'm taking Shahada. It- which for the listeners who don't know, that Shahada is the testimony of faith in Islam. And yet we live in America, in the United States, where there's a lot of Islamophobia. There's a lot of misperceptions about Islam. I know that my um, largely conservative Christian family was not so enthusiastic when I converted or reverted, as you like, to Islam. So I appreciate in your speaking about your professional journey and your spiritual journey, how they manifested in this way with Bayan and the partnership with Bayan and Claremont School of Theology in this idea of a consortium of faiths where it's mutually getting to know each other and becoming better human beings in service of the world, in service of bringing peace, in service of bringing goodness and bringing benefit to others. So, given your unique perspective, can you just say one sentence or one word about the importance of interfaith engagement?
Sure. Well, I'll do so through the story of my name. Some of your listeners might be wondering, jihad. Wait, doesn't that mean holy war? Holy war is actually a Catholic, Catholic idea. Comes from the just war theory, but you know, my dad named the two boys in our family, and my mom named the three girls. So my dad chose jihad. And so growing up in Phoenix, like I said, you're either black, white, or Mexican back in the 70s. And, I played AYSO soccer and as a kid. And so, the teammates, they had never heard the word jihad before, the name jihad. And so, they started calling me Jay, the first initial J.
Yeah.
And, my father was busy, he had the three jobs, all of that. And I don't know, it must have been like 7, 8, 9. And the roster came out for the soccer team that year, and it didn't have my name Jihad. It had Jay Turk.
Oh,
And they made my dad saw the roster. It was printed out and sent with it. So that Saturday he went to the game, which he didn't always do, but he did that week, and he had crossed out the word, the name J, and he had handwritten JIHAD, and he made dittos, which are old school photocopies,
yeah.
and he started passing it out to the parents on the sideline, was like, I'm like a kid. I just wanted to fit in and I didn't really, he goes, I was like, Dad, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me. He goes, no, your name means the struggle to do the right thing.
Yeah.
That's what jihad is, the inner struggle. He said it might be hard for people to say, because at that time it didn't have a negative connotation, it didn't have any connotation. It was just strange.
Yeah.
He said it might be, unusual or strange or harder for people to say or remember, but it's worth that extra effort. So I've always gone by jihad ever since then. And, I was doing my PhD at UCLA when 9/11 happened in Islamic studies. And so I became a little bit of a walking teaching moment. And
Mhm.
sometimes people after 9/11 say, oh, I'm so tired of having to represent Islam and Muslims. I had nothing to do with that. And, why are they coming to me? And my attitude or posture is so different. I never get tired of responding to people's questions. And to me, it's reaffirming of, my Americanness and my humanity when another human being who is bombarded with a certain paradigm or perspective um, has the courage. Because usually it's an honest question. It's like, oh, jihad, doesn't that mean holy wars? It's usually I'm not, maybe it's just the circles I'm in and, I don't look the part. And I seem, I don't have an accent. Culturally, I'm American, and so, people feel very comfortable in asking me honestly. They say, "Oh, wait, what is? Tell me more."
Yeah.
So I never get tired of it. To me, it's an opportunity for human connection, and I think that any kind of interfaith relation isn't an attempt to convert somebody as much as it is to share and to listen to each other's humanity and each other's aspirations of connection to each other and to the divine. And so um, I think that is part of our calling as human beings is to be open to real dialogue, to real conversations, not to dismiss differences, but to acknowledge differences, find beauty in differences, but also have that commonality that will allow us to work together in creating something more beautiful for this world, for ourselves and for next generations to come. So that I think is the framework for any kind of interfaith dialogue, interreligious dialogue, any kind of interfaith cooperation and collaboration on real world projects, whether it be feeding the homeless or education, you know, uh, transformation for people's lives, helping with overcome addiction and abuse, and shelters for people who've suffered abuse and mental health challenges, et cetera. Really creating, having a welcoming environment for the formerly incarcerated to integrate back into the world and be contributing members to the betterment of the society and the community. So I think that there's the real foundation is just
Yeah.
that openness to connection, that desire to connect with other human beings instead of divide.
Well, good sir, kind sir, generous of spirit. Thank you so much for all that you do, working together to make the world a better place. And thank you for this opportunity to hear your spiritual story. And yeah, thank you for the great conversation.
Well, I pray for your good health, your continued growth in your
Thank you.
spiritual journey, and the success of this podcast, and for all that you do.
Thank
May
you.
Allah make it easy for you and make it fulfilling for you, and prepare you for that day in which you will stand before Him. For death is inevitable,
Mm.
and even though you might not be ready for it now, this life's journey is a preparation for that day. And the difference between a mature person and an immature person is how mindful they are and prepared they are
Mm.
to stand before God in judgment, um, and have accountability for choices that they made and behaviors that they manifested. Um, Not that we can earn God's grace, but that we might be more worthy of it, having tried our best. And so, and having been more mindful uh, of God in how we treat each other during this short period of time that we have on this plane of existence.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to all listeners for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go briefly, if you would please take one breath and pause and reflect for a moment on what stays with you from this conversation with Dr. Jihad Turk. May something you heard today help you connect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion, clarity, and courage. May you find your way again and again back home to yourself, back home to the divine, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, please like, share, and comment on this episode. Please follow Beyond Names. Until next time, may you be light. May you consciously participate in growing your light, and may you share your light. Peace be with you.